Hey Rad Reelers, JC here with radreelingfishing. You guys, in this video I'm going to pass along to you some of the pompano fishing secrets that I have learned, you guys. Now I've been catching pompano on jigs and teasers. I've been fishing for them hard for, I don't know, about a month, you guys, and I've caught a lot of pompano and I've learned a lot of things, so I'm just going to pass the information along to you. I don't claim to be an expert, you guys. I'm not an expert fisherman at anything. You guys that have been watching this channel for a while, y'all know that. Anyway, I'm a better fisherman because of the subscribers on this channel that help me out. So listen, you guys are invited to participate in this video. You guys just comment down below, like, share your wisdom and knowledge about pompano fishing. I'm going to share the few things that I know about catching pompano. These are secrets, you guys, that I've learned from people that catch pompano all the time. So stick around, you guys. This video is going to be good. So while I was targeting pompano, I was basically using jigs and teasers, okay? The Doc's Goofy jigs, banana jigs, silly willy jigs, whatever you want to call those bright colored things that just flutter around in the water. But that's what I was using. And I'll put a link up here in this video, okay? You guys, throughout this video, there'll be links to other videos, but I actually made a video on how to rig the jigs and the teasers, okay? Now I got this rigging idea from Sam, Josh, and Ben when I was fishing, snook fishing with them about a year ago. And Sam said, hey JC, you gotta come back up here when the pompano are running. He showed me pictures of pompano, and then he told me how they rig. They put the jig on the bottom and the teaser up a little bit higher. Well, you guys, I learned throughout this whole process, people just rig these things a lot of different ways for pompano. You have to figure out what works for you. But listen, my first outing this year to try and target pompano, I actually called Sam, said, hey, I want to come up your way. We couldn't work it out, but he told me where to go and how to actually fish for these pompano. Well, basically, I got up there, you guys, and I was throwing the jig and the teaser, and a resident there, a local guy, came over, and I asked him, I said, where do you guys cast to catch the pompano? I was basically in the general area, okay? And he asked me the first thing, what size jig are you using? Well, it's important, you guys, that your jig bounces along the bottom. I was using like a 3/8 ounce jig, and he's like, that's not going to do it. You got to have at least a 3/4, a half, or an ounce jig because the current flows through here so fast. And when I had just started fishing, the current was just like barely moving, and he was like, you know, a 1/2 ounce jig right now would be good, but when that current really starts moving, he said you got to have a 1 ounce jig, okay? So the swiftness of the current determines the size of the jig. Now that is the very first thing that I learned, okay? So a couple of things here. Number one is pompano, there's certain seasons when they run, okay? You can't just go out there and say, oh, I want to target pompano today. No, it has to be a season of the year when they're running, okay? Right now in the springtime, a little bit prior to the spring, these pompano were running in our area, and they still are. I've been told that they will be running through the summer months. A guy the other day out on the beach said that he will catch them all summer long along the beach. Okay, so, and there are certain areas where pompano hang out. Sam was telling me exactly where these pompano hang out. Now I'm going to show you guys a picture right here that someone sent me recently of people that were pompano fishing in a particular area, okay? And the reason all these guys are there is because that's where the pompano are hanging out, okay? So listen, there are a lot of different ways that you're going to be able to find out where the pompano are hanging out. Well, no, I shouldn't say a lot of ways. One is just get out there yourself and go fishing. Two is while you're out there fishing for pompano, ask fellow fishermen, you know, hey, where do the pompano hang out? Where's a good place to go pompano fishing? And you guys, number three, and you know what, we all do it, we look on YouTube to see if some YouTuber has actually announced the location of where he's fishing, and you're probably going to be able to find some pompano fishing locations that way. I know there's some guys that announce different locations where they're catching pompano at, so that's a way that you guys that like to fish on YouTube, there you go, that's the way that you can find some pompano. But anyway, you guys, I prefer to just get out there and just pound it, man. I like to get out there and fish and try and find where the fish are. All right, so okay, so locations, all right? Pompano have a specific place that they like to hang out. Now down there at the jetties where I was catching pompano, there's an area where pompano fishermen congregate. That's where most of the pompano are caught. But you guys, along that entire jetty area, their pompano can be caught. And yeah, the first time I went out there targeting pompano, you guys, there were a lot of people fishing in that area where they catch pompano, and I went down a ways and started catching the heck out of pompano. Now, so that brings me to my second point, okay? When I went pompano fishing with Julio, okay, he was teaching me about how to pompano fish in a particular area, and when we got up there, he was like, okay, here's what we do. We just start here and we just move down, and we keep moving until we find the pompano, okay? Same thing at the jetties, all right? You just kind of keep moving around until you find the pompano. That's how I found them, and I was catching them away from where all the people were pompano fishing, all right? And the next day, they actually weren't in the spot where I was catching. I was catching them a little bit further down in another spot. So these fish, they move around, okay? Pompano secrets, pompano tips. These fish are constantly on the move, but they do have certain areas where they like to congregate, little deep holes and around sandbars and stuff like that. All right, the other thing that I learned from Julio is when we walked up on the bridge, he's like, oh, I hope it's not too windy, okay? And that the wind really plays a big part in pompano fishing, because what happens is when it's really windy, a couple things happen, all right? The wind can cause your jig not to reach the bottom depending on the direction of the wind and the flow of the current. Okay, if you've got wind blowing this way and current going this way, that's just going to want to tend to lift your jig up off of the bottom, okay? So you got to have that heavier ounce jig. So a lot of wind, it also stirs up the water clarity. So a lot of wind is going to keep your jig off of the bottom depending on the direction of the tide. And then also a lot of wind is going to cause the water to be murky, and that depends on really the direction of the wind. So when I was fishing at the jetties one day, there was a gentleman that came by and was talking to me. He said, you know what? He said, the next few days are going to be really good for pompano fishing. He said, because the wind is going to be blowing from east to west. Okay, so I'm on the west coast, all right? So if it's blowing from the west to east, that means the wind is blowing towards the shore. And when it's blowing towards the shore really hard, it has a tendency to really stir up the water in the Gulf. Well, I was fishing in the jetties in an inlet, okay? So the water is coming into the inlet on an incoming tide, and it's really murky because the wind has been blowing from west to east and stirring up all the water out in the Gulf, okay? So this guy comes by and he says, pompano fishing is going to be good for the next few days because the wind's blowing from east to west, which means that the water is not going to be all stirred up. And you know what? Sure enough, for like 3 or 4 days, the wind was blowing from east to west and the water clarity was amazing. So that's the other thing that I learned from pompano fishermen is water clarity is really important. If the water is really, really murky, okay, pompano fishing tends to not be very good. Now I learned that, the first mention of that was when I was up on a bridge fishing. A guy came up there pompano fishing and he said, oh, the water's too murky. And then he left and he said, you know, you might have a chance of catching a couple. Well, I didn't catch any pompano that day. And so then I went from that bridge, you know, a couple days later, I'm at the jetties, and all these people are talking about the water clarity and how important the water clarity is, okay? You don't want it really murky. And another gentleman who fishes for pompano often told me you don't want the water to be like super, super clear, all right? There's like this sweet spot for water clarity for pompano, at least fishing in these inlets anyway, okay? All right, so I've talked about the wind, the water clarity, the size of the jigs, and pompano have specific locations that they like to hang out in. All right, now as far as techniques, you guys, in my videos, I've talked about some of this stuff, but you know, these guys have told me this, and I found this to be true when I was catching pompano, that these pompano, they're basically hanging out on the bottom, you guys. So these jigs, you want to bounce them on the bottom, okay? And different people have different techniques for catching these pompano. Right now, you'll see in my videos when I'm catching, you know, getting these pompano bites, I'm popping that thing pretty good sometimes, and other times I'm just bouncing it real easy. And you guys, I actually had pompano grab it when I was reeling in sometimes too. So, you know, yeah, every now and then you're going to catch one just reeling it in, I guess. But you know, there are some guys that were fishing at the jetties and they were just barely bouncing it like in a really, really swift current. And that's one of the things that Julio told me. He said, you know, you want a really, really heavy jig, and when that current is ripping fast, he said, you just want to barely bounce that thing, because when the current's moving fast and you pop it up high, that jig, Julio said, that jig pops up really high. And he said, that's when you start catching the jacks and the mackerel. He said, if you do a really light bounce on the bottom, then that jig is going to stay closer in the zone of where the pompano are hanging out. But listen, guys, I saw people fishing for pompano, all different kind of rigs, all different ways. And here's the other thing that I've learned about pompano fishing, and that is this. Guys, when the pompano come through there, people are going to start catching them. It doesn't matter if you are just very lightly bouncing that jig on the bottom, or if you are popping it off the bottom, or you are, you know, somewhere in between. When those pompano are coming through there, people who are bouncing those jigs and teasers are going to get hooked up. It's so funny how you'd be standing there fishing, and a guy down the way would catch one, then he'd catch another one, then the next guy, then the next guy, and the next guy, and it's like brrr, just right down the line, people would start catching pompano. So that's one of the things that I learned, like if they're not there, okay, you're just not going to catch them. Well, obviously, you're not going to catch them. Now, there was a guy fishing at the jetties, and he fishes with a very, very light touch, okay? A couple of jigs, and he just barely twitches that thing, okay? And one of the things that he shared with me, his theory is, and he catches a lot of pompano, but one of his theories is that when you do that really swift, hard jerk, he was kind of implying that he thinks that just has a tendency to scatter the pompano, you know? And it makes sense, okay? I mean, if there's a school of pompano coming through and then all of a sudden this thing just comes boom, whipping up through them, what are they going to do? They're going to just scatter, okay? But he uses a very, very light motion whenever he's pulling those jigs through the water. And yeah, I saw him, like, he was catching like 5 pompano to my 1 down there. So he definitely knows his stuff about pompano, you guys. So different methods of bouncing these things on the bottom. All right, so let's see, is there anything else that I left out? All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers it. Let me just kind of run back through these things. All right, I talked about the weight of the jig. I talked about the current. I talked about pompano have specific seasons and locations where they like to hang out. I talked about the wind. I talked about the water clarity. And I also talked about the method for bouncing these jigs along the bottom, okay? So that pretty much covers it, you guys. Those are all the pompano secrets that I learned. And you know what, you guys, I had some very successful pompano fishing trips, all right? So, yep, #1 thing is, if the pompano are there, you're gonna catch them, all right? Well, listen, you guys, thanks for watching this video. Thumbs up are appreciated. Everybody get out there and go fishing, man, because life is fun. Live it. See ya!